incidents and walk through effective mitigation strategies that essentially reduce risk. And who is bringing this is none other than, drum roll please, Mr. Rob Dahl, Safety Director at Lease Crutcher Lewis. Rob, it has been a long time since I've seen your face and heard your voice. Thank you very much for your participation today in our summit. I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor. Thank you, sir, for taking the time.
Hey, thanks, Brett. It's great to be here. Hopefully the audio is still working fine. Every now and then I get complaints about that. But this is a repeat of a session I did recently at the Governor's Industrial Safety Conference. And just as a member of that board, I just real quickly want to say thank you to all of you that participated. Our Spokane attendance is always a little bit smaller because it's a bit of a drive, but we like to get on that side of the mountains every other year and hit the audience that's over there. So those of you that were there or took the time to drive over, thank you for participation. Hopefully you got some benefit out of that, and we'll provide your feedback if you haven't already to the team. And then we'll look forward to the upcoming next event in Tacoma next year, same time, same station. So let me just, come on, get to the right screen and we'll share everything. There we go. Hopefully everybody can see the presentation. And so again, this is a repeat of a session. So I did at the conference. Julia came up to me and a couple other people and asked me if I wouldn't do this today for this group. And I'm always happy to share and be invited to share. And I'll just say that sometimes some of these things seem a little bit elementary to me. I first did this presentation for the Construction Safety Summit in Oregon during COVID, when we were forced to a lot of online presentations and so forth, and was really well received there. And again, something that I sometimes think is basic, but definitely worth revisiting, making sure that we're all aware of the rules we need to work under and the reasons we do what we do. And just a real quick example, as I'm preparing this morning, I'm going back and forth with one of my safety managers on a job site who's dealing with a flooring contractor that, according to them, they've been in business for a long time, has never been asked for silica control exposure control plan, and they didn't know they even needed such a thing. So surprisingly, or not surprisingly, I guess, there's still a lot of companies out there that struggle with doing the right thing. So just real quickly, a little bit about me. I've been doing this safety stuff for quite a long time. Had a long public safety career, retired as a fire chief about 16 years ago. I've been doing industrial safety ever since. Pretty broad background in manufacturing, public academia, public visitor venues, manufacturing, and then been in construction for quite a bit of time. Been with Lewis now just for a year. I'm in charge of the safety operations in Oregon, and I have a counterpart, Scott Chubasevsky, up in Seattle, that many of you may know takes care of that part of the world. So as we start talking about hazard correction or identification mitigation, we go back to kind of setting the foundation for an overall successful safety program. So we know that we need our written programs. We know that we need to have some form of employee training. We know we need to enforce and publish and enforce safe work practices. And then what the rule says and what common sense also tells us is we have to have some method of identifying and correcting hazards. So when we get to that, it's important to note that there are things in the rule. Now, I will often say OSHA because I work primarily in Oregon, and my last couple of roles, I've had national and or global experience. So trying to come up with all the monikers for all the enforcement agencies is tough. So OSHA is usually the word that comes out of my mouth. I might remember to say LNI or DOSH or whatever they're calling themselves this week, but just know that I'm aware that the standards are different from state to state, but OSHA is my go-to. But anyway, the rule says that you must have an established method in your plan to identify and manage the safety and health hazards at your job. And you have to have some method of collecting hazard reports from the field. So whether it's a safety suggestion box, a QR code, an app, written cards, whatever, there needs to be an established method that employees on your job sites or in your manufacturing facilities, whatever the case may be, can actually make those hazard reports, and they do get dealt with. Also, as a matter of training, hopefully you're all aware that as a minimum, so if we're asking people to go out and identify hazards and work on correction, the expectation certainly is that we'd give them some level of training that explains to them how to find those things and what to do with them when they do. As a minimum, by rule, your safety committee must be trained in hazard identification and mitigation. So if you have not done that yet or looking for ways to do that, then I would encourage you to do that, and I'm open to assist with that. In the midst of this, we talk about two things. So we've said hazard identification and mitigation, but they're basically two things we talk about: the risk and the hazards. And oftentimes the two get blended together when they are in fact actually two entirely separate things. So start with the definition of risk. So risk, as it's stated there, is the likelihood that a person might be injured or receive some sort of an adverse health effect due to the hazard. So two, again, separate things: risk versus hazard. So an example might be, let's say there's an airline laying on the floor crossing the path, the walkway. That would be a hazard. The risk is that someone might trip on that and actually become injured from that fall. So that's a real basic example of the two and how we separate the two. When we're considering the degree of risk that a particular hazard poses, typically we're measuring two things. This says three, but primarily we look at the frequency and the severity of that exposure. The route of exposure just is, referencing if it's a respiratory issue, we're going to look at it differently than if it's a machine guarding issue versus a mobile equipment issue, et cetera. So we say route of exposure, that's what we're talking about. But we know that we need to measure frequency and severity. And many of you have seen a way to do that, and we're gonna hit that in just a second. But just again, know that under the rule, you have to determine the hazards that are present in your work site, and you have to install some level of control to protect your workforce from those hazards. That's exactly why we're here, what we're talking about. So from a risk assessment process, most of you have probably seen this or a similar chart, most often with the same colors. But again, we're measuring two specific things, and that is frequency and exposure, or frequency and severity. So let me get this guy turned on. So up here on the top left, you'll see likelihood. Every one of these charts has different terms and so forth, but this is where we look at the frequency. So how often is this hazard going to present itself? And then the consequences would be the severity. And some people assign numerical categories here from like 0 to 5. Some people to different titles. This one, as you can see, is a fairly insignificant risk up to a catastrophic risk. And as you are evaluating your risk, the question I often ask people is, where do you think you should spend, if you're using this risk assessment to prioritize your actions, where do you think you should spend most of your time? And a lot of people will come up and say, well, gosh, right up here where it's bold red, it's almost certain it's going to happen. If it does, let's say it's a potential fatality, by gosh, that's where we should spend our time. I would propose that maybe you want to go on to the bottom right, because if it has that catastrophic risk and it's something that's not occurring very often, that you're not really prepared for or maybe equipped for, that might be a better thing to focus on rather than the one that you know is going to happen. Not that we wouldn't focus here, but just consider anywhere in the catastrophic risk category, which ones, when you're setting priorities, you might choose to. Now, a lot of people use this matrix in different ways. Some I've seen them in actual JHA templates. I've seen them in pre-task plan templates. I've seen them standalone. However you do it, as long as you're doing some level of risk assessment, it's necessary to achieve what you're doing. So then we move to the word hazards, right? So what is a hazard? Well, hazards are those things that can cause harm, damage, or as it says, adverse health effects to people. And in this case, we're talking about workplace safety. There's no specific list that says, here's all the hazards you're going to face. If I'm a civil contractor doing outside earthwork, my hazard is going to be much different than if I'm a steel manufacturing plant where I'm running steel mills and stamping machines and those types of things. So the types and the hazards depend on the nature of your work and the environment you're going to be in. And as I said, there is no one size fits all list that you can just go to, right? Hence the reason we need to do our assessments. It is important you carefully consider all of the potential hazards in your workplace and install some measure to protect your workforce, which we'll talk more about in just a second. So we start talking about hazards and assessing those. There are basically 6 categories. And again, like I said, there's no specific list, but we can categorize most everything into one of these 6 categories. And we're going to hit each one of those as we go through this. So first and foremost, we'll talk about biological hazards. And obviously in the days of COVID, this was very known to us and something we focused on a lot. But biological hazards would be anything that has effect on the internal health system in our body, right? So silica is one that we talk a lot about, and again, I've been dealing with all morning, surprisingly, with a
Provide a
with a
bit of the
sub
history of how.
with a subcontractor that doesn't understand the rule. Viruses, bacteria. We've talked about hepatitis and HIV and bloodborne pathogens for quite some time. COVID, which would be an airborne pathogen, obviously something we're concerned about. I left it on there even though we're out of that era, but it does just beg that we need to pay attention to those airborne infectious disease issues, whether it's cold, flu, COVID, other things that we need to make sure we're protecting our workforce against. The next area would be chemical hazards, and this can be broad again, depending on your exposure, depending on the type of work you're doing. It could be solvents and glues that you use in your process, could be the cleaning chemicals that your teams use to clean your facilities, might be chemicals involved in the process, or a lot of us are dealing with welding fumes and some of the recent changes to the rules for chromium and cadmium and those types of things, and respiratory protection requirements that are different from what they ever used to be. So making sure we're addressing all those hazards in that sense as well. Physical hazards can be, a broad array of things. So here we talk about electricity, we talk about fire, we talk about the hazards from confined spaces. Certainly, we've all dealt with the heat illness prevention rule over the last couple of years, the wildfire smoke exposure over the last couple of years. Those types of things all become physical hazards. And of course, the hazards we know exist from machinery, mobile equipment, and those types of things that would fall into this category need to be addressed. Safety hazard seems a little funny that it's there because aren't they all, right? But this would be where we talk about some of the common terminology that we see. We talk about slip, trips, and falls, talk about machine guarding, mobile equipment, those types of things. And I would venture to say that a lot of your inspection programs tend to focus right here. Our checklists that we put people in front of, they're like, what are this list of physical hazards that we know exist? And it's sometimes a challenge to get outside of that to the other categories and really look at chemical hazards or biological hazards or the other things we'll talk about. So open your eyes and your thoughts to exposing yourself to more review, more assessment of other things. Ergonomics, I'm old enough to know when this word first hit, and we've all struggled against it, and the rules have been promulgated and removed and promulgated and removed and delayed and so forth. Ergonomics is a real thing. It's really just the body in motion, and all of the jobs that we do, whether you're a desk person or you're a concrete worker, as you see here in the picture, we all face different ergonomic hazards, whether it be from the list there, from repetitive motion, from taking awkward postures, whether it be the desk setup and where our office equipment is, whether it be where we put tools or where we store equipment, the forces that those tools and the processes present to our bodies. Vibration is a big one that people are starting to pay more and more attention to. We've done vibration studies on machines for years, and now we're starting to focus a little bit more and pay attention to what's the vibration hazard to somebody who's running a machine that's causing that kind of contact stress and other things. Contact stress being really just a study of what's the stress on our joints. We look at contact stress a lot in machinery. This is, in this sense, is what's the stress on our joints from the different methods and procedures and equipment we carry, weights we carry, and those types of things. And of course, one that sadly gets ignored by a lot of folks, and certainly isn't anything that's going to show up on a checklist from a standard workplace safety inspection, but the psychosocial hazards that our people face. And as you all know, you've heard repeatedly, but I'll say it again, construction has the second highest rate of suicide in the United States, comparable only to mining in the oil fields. So, and there's a lot of reasons for that. That's a whole different presentation. I'd be happy to come back and talk about it another time. But if you're not paying attention to the mental health of your teams, we're missing great opportunities to really assist our workforce, really reach in and care and potentially save lives. And speaking as someone who's been affected by suicide in the workplace, have had friends that I've lost, etc. It's very, very important to me. So make sure that whatever your process is, that you're considering the psychosocial hazards that your teams are facing. And they're going to be different depending on where you work, where you live, the workforce that you employ, all types of various things. One of the things we can greatly control is that level of harassment and aggression and abuse that we allow on our work sites. And we hope that, my hope is that, we're all really focused on that and we have basically a zero tolerance for that type of thing. So then the question is, how do we manage the hazards that we identify? So you must manage all of your workplace hazard and risk by rule from our regulatory agencies. You must carry out some form of risk assessment for the nature of the work to determine the hazards and identify them. You must then also introduce appropriate control measures to effectively handle those hazards and provide training to people in all of their duties, which includes how to identify hazards and how do they correct them. If you neglect your responsibility to do these things, you could easily find yourself in trouble with regulatory agencies. You could be up against insurance issues. You could find yourself being denied work from owners. Lots of different things, not to mention, as it says there in the last sentence, just your worker morale, turnover, and other concerns. And I will tell you that, and most of you probably know this, that the workplaces that are most effective are the ones that tend to address these problems and do it effectively and do it openly and don't hide the fact that they have issues on their workplace, on their job site that need to be affected. I worked for a company for a short time, very frustrating role, where they would not spend money on new equipment and tools, and people were using broken equipment. They were making their own step ladders out of wood and boxes and those types of things. Lots and lots and lots of risk. And they just tended to ignore the fact that those hazards exist and spend any money to correct them. So one of the reasons I didn't pay attention or didn't spend much time there. So to the risk assessment. So talking about the process, how do we mitigate the problems we have? So there's this 5-step process that I address. First of all, identifying the hazards. So we do that from a number of different things, right? So we do inspection programs, we do safety walks, we do, perhaps you're doing behavioral-based safety observations, the job hazard analysis, which is purely a hazard identification program, our pre-test plans. Incident review should be something that are included in your hazard process. So identifying what are leading to the injuries and creating mitigation strategies around those as they occur. And then, of course, we have the site safety audits, inspections, whatever term you want to use to those, that depend on where you're at. The code will tell you, depending on your industry and the number of employees, the frequency which you must do some sort of an inspection. I would encourage you to not pay attention to what the rule says because it's very minimal. Our process at Lewis requires weekly safety inspections, and we include a large number of people in our inspection process. So it's not just the safety people that are going out and doing it, and it's not just the superintendent or the foreman. It's project managers, it's project executives, it's project engineers, it's safety coordinators, it's project coordinators, it's superintendents, it's foremen. Everyone has a weekly obligation to a safety inspection at the job site. And there's a number of reasons why we do that. We'll talk more about that in just a second. Well, we talked about this term of inspections and then observations. And if you're a Procore user, you know that they use these terms a little bit improperly and ineffective. But typically, inspections are those things that go out and focus on the static or the system-based hazards. So that's the trip hazards, the machinery hazards, the housekeeping, those types of things. Where an observation focuses more on dynamic behavior-based risks. So the person's failure to take a proper body position or improper use of PPE or those types of things. So differentiating between the two. Now, some of you may have seen this next video before. If you had, just bear with me. But so I tell you that we introduce a lot of different people to our inspection process. And the biggest reason why we do that is everybody sees things differently, right? I have a 25-year fire service career. I was a fire inspector. I was a fire marshal. I was all those things. And so I tend to look at things with that lens oftentimes, and I'll see things related to fire and hazardous materials and stuff, hazards that others without my background may not even consider. Likewise, if you've been really focused in construction and then you move to manufacturing, you might see things differently. So getting different sets of eyes, looking at your job sites, looking at your facilities to determine the hazards is a really good idea. So Real quickly, this video, we're going to play, if I can make it work. Hopefully it'll work. Um, so, oh, I got to watch the ad first, unfortunately. I'm sorry. Darn it. Stop it. There we go. So look through the video and pay attention to the people wearing white and how many times they pass the basketball, and count the number of times that you see them pass the basketball. So feel free to unmute. Let me know, how many passes did you count? How many times did they pass the basketball?
13.
13, 15. How many of you saw the gorilla?
Yep.
Raise your hand if you saw the gorilla. How many of you don't think there was a gorilla? Pay attention. Once you see him, you can't unsee him. So just it's kind of a fun little example. It's interesting to see. I mean, again, once you've seen that, you've seen the gorilla once, you'll never not see the gorilla. But the first time I saw it, I didn't see a gorilla. I was focused on the ball, and I counted those numbers of passes, and I was wrong. I heard somebody say 13, right? Um, it's actually 15. And I didn't see the gorilla. And when I was incensed because I was like, there was no gorilla. And they play the video back, and he's not only is he there, but he stops and waves in the middle of the video. So just a clear example that our vision can be obscured. What we see can be different than the person next to us. And all the more reason to make sure that we are taking multiple opportunities to identify the hazards that exist. Again, in your JHAs, in your pre-test plans, in your incident records, in your hazard observation, your behavioral observations, and different people looking at that different ways. Step number 2, determining who might be at risk. No fancy method for that. Obviously, if you're a machine operator, you're exposed to different risks than if you're just a person elsewhere in the facility. If you're doing hands-on concrete work, you're exposed to different risks than if you're overhanging wall protection, right? So in your risk assessment, as you're looking at what your mitigation steps are going to be, you want to identify who might be affected by that. The assessment, step number 3, we go back to the risk assessment table again, same thing we just showed you. We're measuring frequency and severity. And this is a way to, again, assign a number or assign a priority to it. So when you're faced with multiple different observations or multiple different hazards and like, what am I going to fix first? This is a way for you to do that assessment and prioritize the step that you're going to take. And it's a good way to document, because if you're ever in an audit from a compliance agency or elsewhere, and they're going to say, well, show us the method that you used, having a table such as this and some sort of an actually established form that you can record and memorialize is really important to that process. The next then is to identify the actions that you're going to take to eliminate or control the risks. So everybody has seen this, I hope, the hierarchy of controls, right? This is standard fare for those of us in the safety business. And I will tell you that sadly, most often people go, well, we just add PPE to it. And then they step away and they think they've done the best they could. In reality, PPE is the smallest part, and it's at the bottom of the triangle, the inverted triangle, right? So it should be actually the last thing that you're doing. Now, as it says there, make sure that you're considering some sort of a layered approach. And the example I use comes from my fire service career, in that firefighters are going to enter burning buildings. It's what we do, right? We're never going to take that away and say, well, you can't ever go inside a burning building. There are places that attempt that, but it doesn't work real well. So elimination is not an opportunity for them. Substitution is not. Engineering controls, so we give them some very specific tools. We give them protective equipment and so forth. And administratively, we give them training and policies by which they can and can't do certain things. But ultimately, I still have to apply PPE, because if you're going to be in a burning building, all the engineering and administrative controls are great, but it's still hot, it's still smoky, you still have to have an air pack, still have to have a helmet, you still have to have gloves, right? So we're considering all of these things on that table to deal with those risks. So don't allow your folks and your teams just to go, well, we'll put gloves on that. We'll put a helmet on that. We'll put a face shield on that, or we'll make sure we wear eyeglasses. Those things are critically important. But look at the other things. And first and foremost, is this hazard, is this risk something you can just completely eliminate from your job site and you don't have to deal with it? And there's opportunities for that as well. So then as it moves into, how do we actually do it? The process of ensuring that hazards are correct is really important. So having a solid method of identifying the corrective measures will do all these things that you see on the bullet list there. It gives you prevention of hazards. It gives you risk mitigation. It gives you accountability, which I know is huge in a lot of workplaces. And I often talk about too, that when it comes to safety, it was kind of a three-legged stool where we talk about production, quality, and safety together. None of those can exist. One leg, the stool can't exist with any one leg missing. So the things we do that affect our safety also will drive continuous improvement because it gives you less downtime, gives you better processes, and so forth. Obviously, for mitigating things properly, we're avoiding regulatory issues, and ultimately, we're reduced costs. We all know that the cost of correcting a hazard is much less than the cost of treating an injury or dealing with damage and downtime and production loss if we don't address the problem. So back from a rule standpoint, as the employer, you're not expected to completely eliminate all the risks in workplace. That would be impossible. It's dangerous work that we do. It's hazards that we face. That's why we're there. But you must do everything reasonably practical to protect the people in your workplace from harm. And that goes through identifying the hazard we talk about, doing the risk assessment, and then deciding how you can control the risks and actually follow through and get those things completed. We've got a little bit of time, so I'm not going to go through all these, but here's just a couple of slides. So just real quickly, again, go ahead and feel free to unmute and call out the hazards that you see in this particular manufacturing facility. And this is not a staged picture, just so you know.
What an awful place to walk.
Right?
Oh,
right?
My goodness.
So we've got trash on the floor. We've got airlines on the floor. We've got extended electrical cords, right? We've got an open control panel because it's easier to run the hose through it rather than install it properly. We've got an accumulation of materials on the floor, etc. Right? Pretty easy to see some of the hazards in that one. What's in the bucket? I can tell you that bucket was full of oily rags and solvent. Is that proper storage for those types of things? Absolutely not. Right? We had issues with control panels, etc. Lots of different things to see here. How about this one? What do you see? Anybody?
Oh, I love that cord. That's nice.
Right? So that cord's in great shape, right? What else do you see?
Looks like it came with a secondary handle, but it's already been removed. You can see the collar right below the chuck.
Yep. Okay, so we
no
took
guards.
off the
Look
torque
at the grinders right next to it.
Looks
Same
like
thing.
some grinder blades need to be replaced real bad.
Yep. So the blades aren't being attended to. The guards are missing. This is one of the most common things that we'll see with these portable grinders. And I'm sure we've all seen the many depictions of the blades that disintegrate and are lodged in people's cheeks and eyes and faces. I've treated those injuries. Trust me, they're not fun to deal with. How about this one?
Oh. What's the still like?
So we've got a trip hazard, right? We've got a trip hazard here. We've got these numerous fire extinguishers laying down. What does the code say about mounting of fire extinguishers?
Yeah, it's got to be elevated somewhere around 2.5, 3 feet. I don't remember the exact NFPA, but somewhere in that area.
No less than 3 feet, no higher than 5, must be mounted, or we can put it in one of our stanchions and so forth. Why would you have these three laying here? We don't know. Obviously, somebody went out, was doing some exercise to claim, and they just stopped and laid these here. So they need to be stored properly. This is Cat5 wire, so it's not necessarily an electrical hazard, but definitely a housekeeping and a trip hazard issue, correct? So again, most of the things in the pictures are pretty standard fare. I tried to find some that might, catch people. But what do you see here?
So it looks like there's an interlock device on that door handle, but they had to have bypassed it in order to keep the equipment running with the door open.
Okay, and the fact that the door's open in the first place, right?
That's
Who's
another
allowed
problem.
who's allowed to open that box and go into it?
Only those trained to service that equipment, not the operator, that's for sure.
Yeah,
Unless he's trained to do that.
Yep, exactly.
But
And
he
they
shouldn't bypass an interlock.
The same company I was telling you about that didn't want to buy safety equipment had a lot of PLC controllers for the machinery, which were inside the 480 panels. And they trained the machine operators to go into the 480 panel to reset the PLCs. That's a bit of a problem. But so we have the open control panel. We've got a lot of accumulated spillage material on the floor. We've got pads for the spill. So the answer to this is we just keep putting pads down and run a mop on the floor. We're not doing anything to address the actual leak itself that's producing the material on the floor. So this was an ongoing hazard that about 2 hours of maintenance time fixed the problem finally when we pushed it. So this is one of my favorites. So this is a drywall saw. This is a knot tied in the extension cord, which is again tied in another knot and hung from a nail, similar to the cord over here that's hanging from a nail with another knot tied in the extension cord. This was an ongoing problem on one of our projects. That's just the way everybody thought to treat electrical cords, which we all know creates a hazard. And I watched a lot of people walk right by this and not consider or think that it was anything wrong. So again, back to the idea of we can see different things. What's wrong with this picture?
Oh, combustibles right in front of electrical panels. You got to have 36 inches of clearance.
Well, they do. See, there's the line down there at the bottom. They're within the, but yeah. So certainly access to the electrical panel is an issue. How about the accumulation of combustibles?
Yeah,
There's code that tells you how much combustible material you can have inside of an enclosed facility, right? Now they needed these boxes for their process, but they weren't allowed to store all the boxes in the middle of the process. They had to have warehousing and move them inside and so forth. Same thing with pallets, right? You're only allowed to have so much high storage and so much height and so much accumulation of the wood pallets based on the fire load, et cetera. So again, lots of different things that not everybody would consider, not everybody would know to look at. They thought this was okay because they were outside the red line, even though those aren't, and they didn't even pay attention to what the quantities were at all, much less just the overall housekeeping issue, the way that the boxes are stored. This is one of my favorites. It's a little bit hard to see, but this is a gentleman working. This is a extended awning over an opening over a doorway. He's working on the roof above the awning, wearing a harness, connected and tied off to this lifeline, which runs clear up to the top of the building. This is a courtyard that's about 30 feet deep. So this building sits back about 30 feet from the edge. So is this a sufficient tie off for this person?
No, he's gonna hit the ground when he pendulum swings. Well, he's probably gonna hit that fascia of the building first, and then he'll hit the ground.
Yeah. So not only he's hooked to a grab line, right, with an extendable safety pack. So additional 6 feet of fall distance once he falls. So he's definitely gonna hit the ground because it's just below this picture. How about his ladder position?
That's about
be extended
a
up
half to one.
3 feet above.
Yeah, we'd like to see the top of that ladder at least 3 feet, 3 rungs above the edge, right? So we can get on and off of it properly. And again, I will tell you, this is a company that does this work regularly, and they were surprised when we questioned it. They didn't think that they were in violation or doing anything wrong. Lockout, tag out. It works, right? Duct tape fixes everything. That was actually put in place by the electrician. He thought he was meeting the standard.
He should be removed from the site.
Absolutely, at least retrained, right? So inspections will address what's wrong. Observations will identify issues with people's adherence to our rules and our system. Both are critical for identifying and promoting a strong safety culture, the inspections and the observations, and to drive continuous improvement. If we do all those things, we will have a better workplace. The biggest thing is creating this feedback loop too. And I would ask you that in your inspection process or in your whatever your hazard identification process is, how do you close the loop? If an employee identifies a safety hazard and it's raised to your level of concern, do you go back and close the loop with that employee to say, thank you for your concern. We read it, we saw it, we acted on it. There's the actions we took, or here's the reason we can't do anything, but whatever the case may be. If you're not closing that loop, consider how willing those people are ever going to be to come back and give you another safety hazard or work with you again. So we need to make sure there's a process by which we hold people accountable to correct the things that we find wrong and that they're done in a timely fashion. We, in our system, we set a priority to every hazard. We set the time that it needs to be corrected based on that priority. And we follow up and follow through with whether or not it gets corrected. And we do our best to hold people accountable to what they should be doing. Ultimately, bottom line, step away from all the other rules. There's this lovely thing we all know called the general duty clause. So if you're not identifying hazard in your workplace, if you're not working on a strong mitigation strategy, if you're not correcting the hazards that are made known to you, even if there's no specific rule, guaranteed you're going to get caught in the general duty clause. General duty clause is used when they came to COVID. They didn't have any other rules, so it's like you have to have a healthy workplace, so we're going to use general duty clause. Workplace violence. There's not a specific rule on active shooter training and response and so forth. They will hit you with the general duty clause if you're not doing everything you can to control the effects or the method or the opportunities for workplace violence and harassment. So be very aware that I've had some people come to me and say, well, there's no rule that says I can't do it that way. Well, there's always a rule. And if nothing else, here it is. And the last thing I'll tell you is it's always better to prepare and prevent, right? Identifying your hazards, mitigating this hazard before they become injuries and accidents, before they become property damage, before they affect your production, your quality, much more better than you see there repairing and repent and wishing that we'd taken better action previously. Leave my contact information on the screen. If anybody has any questions or comments, I'm free. I got a couple more minutes before I have to jump to another meeting, but I'm happy to take any questions or hear your comments. Feel free to reach out to me by phone or email, especially you, Rhett. Write that down so we make sure we're reconnected and getting you to where we need to be. But I appreciate the opportunity. I hope that you got some benefit out of it, and I'll shut up and listen for a minute if anybody wants to say anything. I got a couple of hands. So DK, you got your hand up.
I do.
Yep,
Don
you
King.
did.
Oh, okay. Don King here. Rob, very good. Excellent presentation. One thing I always think is important that we need to do more of is I always try to finish up my inspections with about 4 or 5 positives that I found out on the job and put them in the report.
Yeah, we actually, in our process, we require a specific number of positive observations on every inspection for the same reason. Because we want to catch people doing things right more than we want to catch them doing them wrong. ZF, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just curious because we're a construction company that goes in these manufacturing plants and sees the pictures you see every day.
Yep.
Not every place we work at is the same level of safety as us. How do you mitigate those with the people, but also still get those jobs and contracts to keep our guys working?
So to me, it's all relationship based, right? Everything we do in safety is primarily relationship based. So if you have the opportunity to have those conversations, hey, look, here's a concern. The other thing is contractual. So I'll give you a specific example. When I was with Benson, our contracts required that our customer provide us with a safe working environment. And we had a job in Seattle where the general would never address housekeeping, and it got to the point where our guys were at risk. And we finally just went to him after several opportunities to try to get it corrected and said, we're leaving the job site and there's no penalty. And when you get it clean and safe for us, we'll be happy to come back. And that was extreme. Didn't rarely ever had to do that, but that is an opportunity where you might have to go that far. But depends on what your contract language says. But I think I get a lot more done. You know, it's the whole thing is you can attract more bees with honey than oil. So relationships, establishing relationships with the safety people for the site you're working on, and having the ability to have conversation with them and encourage them. Because again, in some cases, they may not even know that it's wrong. So, BH.
Yeah, this is Bart with the follow. Hey, first off, Rob, when you talked about observations and circling back to the people and letting them know that they're closed out, I also couple those with, based on the severity of the hazard and the significance of the exposures, do recognitions for them, and then promote that within our crews to let them know that this is a good thing. Please do this. You're looking out for not only yourself, but other people next to you.
Regularly recognize and reward, and you will rarely have to reprimand. My favorite little saying, right? So yeah, recognition. I identified, we had a foreman who actually had submitted more safety inspections than anybody else in the company. And so I made him his own special little reward, gave him a name tag for his desk, etc. And you would have thought that I had bought him, you know, a trip to Hawaii or something. He just was so excited by that. So recognize, you know, simple recognition, thank yous, calling people out for positive performance can go a real long way and get you a whole lot of credibility. So, Don, you have another comment?
Any other questions for Rob? Debbie, Debbie Kosman, do you have a question? I see your hand up.
No, I just raised my hand because I saw the gorilla.
Oh, got it. Right on. That's probably where some of those were. Right
Okay.
on. Right on. Rob, we really appreciate it. Any other questions for Rob? John, you have a question, please.
No, I don't know if it's a question necessarily for Rob or not, but you know, I do remember hearing something during an L&I update that there was an ergonomic standard that was being proposed, and it was making its way through. I don't know if anybody can comment on that at all or not.
I don't know, maybe Steve's still on, but I can tell you that ergonomics from an OSHA and compliance standpoint has been an issue for a number of years. They've made several passes at trying to push big, strong standards, and have always been defeated by various industry partners. I do know that L&I has taken a strong look at that, and I haven't seen any of the proposals yet, but.
No, I appreciate that, Rob. I remember back in the day when I was still active duty, when ergonomics were being proposed in the military side of business, and don't recall if that ever made its way all the way through, even at that. I mean, this is 20 plus years ago.
Yeah.
So
okay,
thanks.
I apologize. I got to jump, but I'm actually facilitating another meeting in 3 minutes. So I got to get that.
Well,
so thanks guys for the invitation. I appreciate it. And I'll hopefully stay in touch with your